A Dallas police officer and his loyal German shepherd were walking through a snow-covered park when they saw a little girl. A little girl sat on a tattered blanket, arranging empty plates as if they were having a feast. She looked up with trembling lips and whispered, "Mommy said if we pretend to eat, it will hurt less." Those words pierced the police officer's heart. What he discovered next will reveal a mother's silent struggle, a loyal dog's silent devotion, and a fight for justice that will restore a family's dignity. What happens next will remind you that miracles still exist among us. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your country. Comment so we can see how far this story goes. And if you believe no child should go hungry, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might change the way you look at hope, faith, and second chances. The winter that year had draped Dallas, Texas, in an uncharacteristic cloak of snow, transforming the usually bustling southern city into a hushed, frozen landscape where the streets gleamed white and the trees stood bare and stiff under the weight of frost. The air was sharp and biting, the kind of cold that settled deep into bones and turned every breath into a visible wisp of vapor. Even the neon lights of downtown seemed dimmed by the heavy gray skies above. Officer Ethan Carter, a 33-year-old patrol officer with the Dallas Police Department, pulled his wool coat tighter against his broad chest as he stepped out from his cruiser, boots crunching against the icy ground of the old city park he had decided to walk through after finishing a tense shift. Ethan was tall, standing 6 feet with a frame that carried both strength and a certain weariness from years on the job. His short, dark brown hair was flecked with strands of early gray at the temples, a premature mark of stress earned through long nights on patrol and countless encounters with violence, sorrow, and injustice. His eyes, a shade of hazel that shifted between green and brown depending on the light, often carried a quiet storm alert, probing, yet softened by a layer of empathy he had never managed to bury despite the uniform he wore. Ethan had chosen law enforcement because he believed in protection and fairness, but years of bureaucracy, false accusations against colleagues, and seeing the poor fall through society's cracks had tested him. Still, he held on to that ember of belief that even one act of kindness, one gesture of intervention, could shift a life. It was that ember that led him to slow his pace in the park as flakes of snow floated down in the dim afternoon light. The park itself was a relic of another time, its playground rusted, its benches splintered and worn, and its paths cracked by roots of old oak trees that lined the edges like patient sentinels. Snow softened the brokenness, covering the rust and grime with a deceptive purity. Ethan scanned the area out of habit, his breath steady, and that was when he noticed something unusual beneath the oldest oak near the frozen pond. A faded, tattered blanket had been spread out directly on the icy ground, and on it sat a little girl, small and fragile against the vastness of winter. She could not have been more than 8 years old, her body thin, her cheeks pale with a tint of red from the biting cold. She wore a pink winter coat that was clearly too small for her frame. The sleeves ended above her wrists, and the fabric was frayed at the seams. Her dark brown hair, long and tangled, spilled unevenly around her narrow shoulders, and her eyes, large and round with a watery hazel glint, seemed far too old for her face, carrying a weariness children should not know. The girl, Lily Miller, had the delicate look of a child who had not been properly fed for weeks. Her lips slightly chapped, her movements slow and deliberate, as though conserving every ounce of energy she had left. Yet there was a determination in the way she sat cross-legged on the blanket, a stubborn attempt to pretend all was normal. Before her on the blanket were several old paper plates, cracked plastic cups, and one dented tin spoon. They were completely empty, but Lily moved her hands carefully, pretending to pour tea into a cup, then cutting invisible pieces of food onto a plate before nodding to herself as though reassuring an unseen guest that the meal was delightful. The sight stopped Ethan cold. His trained mind instantly calculated possible scenarios, runaway, neglected child, or something darker, but his heart overrode the calculations with one overwhelming feeling: sorrow. The empty dishes against the white snow seemed like a cruel metaphor, a feast with no nourishment, a childhood reduced to survival games. But Lily was not alone. Sitting beside her, lying protectively across one edge of the blanket, was a German shepherd. The dog was large, clearly full-grown, with a muscular build under his thick black and tan coat dusted with snowflakes. His upright ears twitched at Ethan's approach, and his amber eyes locked onto the officer with a piercing intensity that communicated intelligence and suspicion. This was Max, about 6 years old, his body strong but lean, carrying the scars of both loyalty and hardship. His fur was well-groomed in patches but tangled and dulled in others, suggesting he was once cared for but had since been forced into harder times. Max shifted slightly, his muscles taut, his gaze never leaving Ethan, and a low growl rumbled from his throat, a sound more protective than hostile. The way he placed himself between Lily and the approaching figure revealed his role more clearly than words could. Guardian, companion, and perhaps the only source of warmth the child truly had in this winter wasteland. Ethan, trained to remain calm even in tense situations, stopped a few feet away and lifted his hands slightly, palms open, a non-verbal sign to the dog that he meant no harm. "Hey there," he said quietly, his voice softened from its usual commanding cadence. "Cold day for a picnic, isn't it?" His words hung in the frosty air. Lily's eyes flickered up to meet his, wary yet hopeful, her lips parting slightly before she lowered her gaze again, as though embarrassed to be caught in her little game. After a long pause, she spoke in a whisper so faint Ethan had to lean closer to hear. "Mom says, if you pretend to eat, it helps with the hunger." Her words pierced him more deeply than any weapon ever could. There was no defiance in her voice, only resignation, a child repeating her mother's wisdom as though clinging to the last rope of comfort. For a moment, Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had dealt with crime, with bodies, with addicts and liars, but this raw innocence wrapped in deprivation was the kind of wound he never grew used to. He glanced again at the plates, at the girl's chapped hands holding an empty cup, at the loyal dog pressing closer to her side. His instincts screamed to act, but his training urged caution. He could not just grab the child and rush her away. He needed to gain trust, to understand the situation. He took one slow step closer, and that was when Max's growl deepened, the shepherd's hackles rising, his body coiled like a spring. Ethan froze, then shifted his eyes downward, avoiding direct challenge, and spoke not to the girl but to the dog. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt her, I promise." To his surprise, Lily reached her thin fingers to stroke Max's head, murmuring softly to him, and the dog gradually lowered his growl, though his eyes stayed fixed on Ethan. The gesture told Ethan more than any file ever could. This dog trusted only her, and if she allowed him, he might one day trust Ethan too. Lily hesitated, then bent down, rummaging in the pocket of her small coat. From it she pulled a folded piece of lined notebook paper, edges frayed, creased so many times it was soft like cloth. With trembling hands she held it out toward Ethan. He crouched slightly, careful to keep distance in case Max lunged, and gently took the paper. Unfolding it, he read the simple, uneven handwriting, the letters shaky but clear. "Please help me. I'm tired of pretending to eat. I'm really hungry." Ethan stared at the note for several seconds, the world around him falling silent except for the faint hiss of falling snow. His hazel eyes lifted back to the child, who sat staring at him with a mix of fear and desperate hope. It was in that moment, under the silent snowfall of Dallas, that Ethan Carter felt something shift inside him. He knew he could not walk away, not tonight, not ever, not from her. The snowfall had thickened by the time Officer Ethan Carter walked back through the creaking park gates, his breath misting in the bitter evening air. The note from Lily Miller still sat folded in his gloved hand, the shaky letters etched into his mind with a permanence no case file could erase. He had stepped away briefly, heart pounding with urgency, to the neon-lit row of shops along the edge of downtown, where the smell of fried food and hot bread leaked into the frigid air. A diner named Texan Star Grill, one of those cozy family-owned places that clung stubbornly to tradition, still had its lights glowing. Inside, Ethan pushed open the door and was greeted by a rush of warmth and the hum of an old jukebox. Behind the counter stood Maria Hernandez, a woman in her late 50s with thick salt and pepper hair pulled into a bun, a frame softened by years of kitchen work, and eyes that carried both sternness and motherly kindness. She wore a navy apron smeared with flour and grease, and when she looked up, she fixed Ethan with the expression of someone who knew him well. Maria had lived in Dallas her entire life, raising 3 sons alone after her husband died in a construction accident. Life's hardships had shaped her into a tough but compassionate woman, respected by regulars for her no-nonsense honesty and for feeding those who sometimes could not pay. "Evening, Officer Carter," she said, voice warm but with the edge of a question, as though sensing something unusual in his demeanor. Ethan gave her a faint nod, pulling off his gloves. "Maria, I need sandwiches, fries, a couple of fruit packs, and something warm to drink. Quickly, please." It's for a child. Maria's brows knit together, but she didn't press him for details. She simply moved with practiced efficiency, piling food into paper bags, her movements swift despite the stiffness in her fingers from early arthritis. When she handed him the bags, she added a thermos of hot chicken soup without charging him, murmuring, "For the child, whoever she is. No one should be hungry in this cold." Ethan met her gaze briefly and gave a quiet thank you before heading back into the storm. The walk back through the snow-covered park felt longer now that he carried the weight of the food and the heavier weight of responsibility. Beneath the old oak, the sight remained the same. Lily still sat on the blanket with Max pressed at her side, snow dusting both of them like a fragile frosting. The girl's head lifted at the sound of his boots crunching, her wide hazel eyes glimmering with a mix of hope and disbelief. "I brought you something," Ethan said gently, crouching down and setting the bags before her. He pulled out the sandwiches first, wrapped in wax paper, then the fries steaming in their box, and finally the thermos of soup. Lily's small hands trembled as she reached, hesitant, as though afraid the food might vanish like another game of make-believe. When she touched the warm paper, her face lit with an expression Ethan knew he would never forget. Max sniffed the air, his nose twitching, his amber eyes flicking between the food and Ethan. A soft whine replaced his growl, and when Ethan unwrapped a piece of sandwich and set it carefully on a napkin before the dog, Max leaned forward and ate with cautious dignity, chewing slowly, never breaking his watch on the girl. Lily, however, tore into her sandwich with restrained hunger, biting slowly at first, then faster, though she stopped halfway. Ethan frowned, wondering if she had lost her appetite, but Lily shook her head, clutching the other half. "This is for Mom," she whispered. The way she said it carried a loyalty that seemed far too heavy for an 8-year-old's shoulders. Ethan poured soup into the plastic lid, steam curling into the air, and handed it to her. She cupped it with both hands, chapped skin reddened by the heat, and took careful sips. Max finished his portion and settled back down, licking his muzzle, his large frame curling protectively once again around the girl. Ethan sat cross-legged across from them, the cold seeping into his legs despite his heavy uniform, and for several minutes there was only the sound of Lily eating and the faint hiss of falling snow. When her hunger eased slightly, Ethan spoke again. "Can you tell me about your mom?" The girl looked at him cautiously, as though measuring how much she could trust him. "Her name's Sophie," Lily said at last. "She used to work at a big hotel. She was good at it. She always cleaned everything until it sparkled. People liked her. But then..." Her voice trailed off, her little brow furrowing as she tried to recall details. "They said she did something bad." "She didn't. I know she didn't. They fired her anyway. Now we live in our car. Mom says things will get better soon, but I don't think she eats at all anymore. She gives me her food." Ethan felt the sting of her words like a blade. He had seen poverty in Dallas, but hearing it through the trembling voice of a child carried a weight different from reports and statistics. He glanced at Max, who now rested his head on Lily's lap, eyes closed but ears twitching at every sound. The dog seemed to absorb every word, as though sharing her burdens. "Your mom sounds strong," Ethan said softly. Lily nodded, clutching the half sandwich tighter. "She is. She tells me stories at night. She makes me laugh so I won't be scared." The pride in her voice was undeniable, and it sparked something in Ethan's chest that had nearly burned out during his years on the force. He wanted to ask more, but Lily's small shoulders had begun to shake. Whether from cold or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. He noticed her coat, far too thin for the weather, and his jaw tightened. Ethan pulled off his own scarf, thick wool-lined, and draped it gently around her neck. "Keep this," he said. She blinked at him, startled, then nodded. Max sniffed the scarf curiously, then rested his head back down, seemingly satisfied. As the snow deepened, Ethan knew he couldn't linger much longer without drawing attention from his station for being off route. He stood slowly, brushing snow from his coat. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised. Will you be here? Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. We always come here. Max likes it. It feels safe. Ethan reached down, gently tapped the bag with the leftover food closer to her. Eat what you can. Share with your mom. I'll make sure you both have more soon. For a moment, the girl's eyes lit with a gratitude so fierce it nearly undid him. As Ethan walked away through the snow, he felt Max's eyes on him until the last possible second, a silent warning and perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement that for tonight, at least, the officer was not an enemy. Ethan glanced back once before disappearing into the trees. The image burned into his mind. A thin girl wrapped in his scarf, sitting on a blanket dusted with snow, guarded by a loyal German shepherd, clutching half a sandwich to give her mother. The next afternoon, Dallas was buried under a heavy curtain of snow, unusual for the city but relentless that winter. The streets were muffled, cars crawled under layers of frost, and the faint glow of neon signs reflected on icy sidewalks. Ethan Carter adjusted his scarf as he stepped out of the precinct, his boots crunching against the hardened ground. He had arranged his shift carefully, trading patrol duties so he could slip away again around the same time as yesterday. The promise he made to Lily weighed on him, more binding than any oath he had ever sworn in uniform. The park was quieter than before, the snow covering even the old oak branches until they sagged under the weight. As he neared the familiar spot, he saw Lily sitting cross-legged on the patched blanket, bundled tightly in the scarf he had given her. Max, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan fur, sat upright beside her, his ears pricked and alert as though expecting Ethan's arrival. The moment Max's amber eyes spotted him, the dog gave a low, measured growl that quickly softened into a whine of recognition. Lily smiled shyly, brushing snowflakes from her lashes. I knew you'd come, she said, her small voice barely carrying in the muffled park. Ethan knelt, setting down another bag of food from Maria's diner, but before Lily could reach for it, a figure appeared at the far end of the path. The woman's steps were slow, each crunch in the snow deliberate. She wore a second-hand beige coat, its buttons mismatched, and boots too thin for the weather. Her hair, the same dark curls as Lily's, was pulled into a messy bun, stray strands sticking to her reddened cheeks. This was Sophie Miller. Sophie was in her early 30s with a slender frame worn thin by hardship. Her face carried a fragile beauty framed by exhaustion, and her eyes, dark and wide like Lily's, held a depth of quiet resilience. Years of unfair struggle had hardened her in some ways, but beneath it there remained gentleness, the kind that made her put her daughter's needs before her own. She moved with caution, as though the world had taught her that good things could vanish without warning. When Sophie reached the blanket, Lily leapt up with excitement. Mom! He came back again. And look, food! Sophie's gaze shifted toward Ethan. For a moment she froze, suspicion flickering across her expression. The sight of a uniformed officer was not comfort, but a threat for someone who had once been accused falsely. Ethan rose slowly, pulling off his gloves to appear less imposing. You must be Sophie, he said evenly, his voice softer than his usual police tone. I'm Officer Carter. I met Lily yesterday. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly. And why is a police officer spending his afternoons with my daughter? Her tone was calm but edged with steel, the defensive armor of a mother who had learned not to trust easily. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He pulled out Lily's note, carefully unfolded, and offered it across the space between them. Sophie's face paled as she read the trembling words. Please help me. I'm tired of pretending to eat. I'm really hungry. Her hands shook, and for a moment she closed her eyes as though steadying herself against a wave of guilt. She was just playing, Sophie muttered, her voice hoarse. I never wanted her to... She stopped, biting down hard on her lip. Ethan's eyes softened. She wasn't playing. And no child should feel she has to beg like this. I don't judge you, Sophie. I just want to help. Max rose, moving between Sophie and Ethan, his large frame standing like a shield. His breath steamed in the frosty air, ears tilted forward in warning. Sophie placed a calming hand on the dog's back. It's all right, boy, she whispered, though her gaze never left Ethan's. After a long silence, she sighed. We're not used to kindness anymore. They all sat on the blanket, and Ethan began unpacking the food. Sophie tried to refuse, shaking her head, but Lily eagerly split the fries and held some out to her. Please, Mom. Eat too. Sophie hesitated, then accepted, her eyes glassy as she chewed slowly, almost as if ashamed. Ethan noticed her movements, how she set aside portions for later, how she stretched every bite. As they ate, Ethan finally asked, "Lily said you worked at a hotel once." Sophie's shoulders stiffened. "The Grand Monarch," she replied quietly. "I was a housekeeper there for 6 years. I loved that job. I worked hard, made rooms shine like new. But one day a guest accused me of stealing jewelry. I didn't. I would never. But no one believed me. Security searched my cart, my locker. Nothing. Still, they said it was better to let me go quietly than cause scandal." Her jaw clenched, a flash of pain crossing her features. That accusation ruined everything. Once a hotel thinks you're a thief, no one else will hire you. Ethan felt anger simmer inside. He had handled enough theft cases to know how often the powerless became easy scapegoats. Sophie's voice softened, bitter, yet weary. "After that, I worked odd jobs. Then the layoffs came during the pandemic. Bills piled up, rent gone. Now, here we are." She gestured faintly toward Lily, whose small body was curled up against Max, sharing warmth with the dog. Ethan leaned forward. "Sophie, you deserve your name cleared. You shouldn't carry that stain forever, and Lily deserves better than this cold park." Sophie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Every time I tried to speak up, no one listened. To them, I'm just a poor single mother. Who cares what I say?" Before Ethan could respond, a voice called from the path. An elderly man in a worn wool cap approached, carrying a grocery bag. This was Mr. Howard Jenkins, the park's unofficial caretaker, a retired janitor in his 70s with a stooped frame but eyes still bright with mischief. He often checked in on the homeless who drifted through, sharing leftovers and coffee. "Afternoon, Sophie," he greeted, handing her a bag of day-old bread and canned beans. His face was lined with decades of hard labor, but his kindness was obvious. Ethan introduced himself, and Mr. Jenkins chuckled. "You're the officer she should trust, huh? Good luck. Sophie's got walls higher than City Hall." He winked at Sophie, who rolled her eyes but smiled faintly. After giving Lily a peppermint candy, the old man shuffled away, leaving a trace of warmth behind. As dusk deepened, Ethan stood. "I'll come again tomorrow. And Sophie, I'll look into your case. Maybe there's still a way to prove your innocence." She looked at him, torn between hope and skepticism. "Don't make promises you can't keep, officer." Ethan nodded, the snow crunching as he turned away. "I don't make promises lightly." Behind him, Max's deep bark echoed once, a sound not of hostility, but of acknowledgement. Ethan glanced back to see Lily snuggled into Sophie's side, the scarf still wrapped around her, the dog's head resting on her lap. A fragile family in the snow, holding on, but no longer entirely alone. The next morning, Dallas woke under a slate sky, the snow piled high on rooftops and sidewalks, making the city look like a northern town instead of its usual southern sprawl. Ethan Carter walked with deliberate steps toward the towering glass facade of the Grand Monarch Hotel, the place Sophie Miller had once worked, and the scene of the accusation that had destroyed her livelihood. His hazel eyes narrowed as he studied the structure, polished, gleaming, almost sterile in its perfection. A place that prided itself on luxury, but hid behind it the stories of those like Sophie, who had given years of work only to be discarded at the first hint of scandal. Inside, the lobby glowed with warm lighting bouncing off marble floors. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, and the scent of expensive polish and faint lavender hung in the air. Guests moved in and out, businessmen in pressed suits, women in designer coats, but Ethan's gaze focused on the staff. He spotted a woman behind the reception desk, early 40s, tall and slim with severe cheekbones and hair pulled into a tight bun streaked with blonde and gray. Her name tag read Clara Whitmore. Clara's crisp uniform was immaculate, her posture rigid, and her eyes sharp, scanning every detail around her. Years of working in customer service had made her polite but firm, the kind of person who offered guests a perfect smile, yet had no patience for those who fell short of standards. "Good morning, officer," Clara greeted, her voice clipped, betraying curiosity at seeing a policeman in the lobby. "How may I assist you?" Ethan leaned on the counter, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "I'm looking into a theft case that occurred here some time ago. Jewelry, a guest's complaint. Do you recall? Clara's eyes flickered briefly, a shadow passing across her face, though her smile remained plastered. That was over a year ago, wasn't it? A very unfortunate incident. The hotel handled it swiftly, I assure you. Swiftly, Ethan repeated, his voice measured. By firing Sophie Miller? Clara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Housekeepers are easily replaced. The guest was influential. We had to preserve reputation. I'm sure you understand. Her words made Ethan's jaw tighten. I understand justice matters more than reputation. Sophie was accused without evidence. I need to review staff records from that day, particularly shift assignments. Clara hesitated, then sighed, lowering her voice. I shouldn't be telling you this, but Sophie wasn't the only one near that floor. There was also a junior concierge, Daniel Marks, young man, ambitious, always looking for ways to curry favor with wealthy guests. He left abruptly not long after the incident. That always struck me as convenient. Ethan noted the name. Where can I find him? Clara shook her head. No idea. He vanished. But if you want whispers, ask the cleaning staff. They see everything. Ethan thanked her and moved deeper into the hotel, where a line of housekeepers pushed carts filled with linens. He approached one, a middle-aged woman with round features, olive skin, and weary eyes that softened when she noticed his badge. Her name tag read Rosa Alvarez. Rosa had worked at the hotel for over 20 years, her back slightly stooped from years of lifting mattresses and bending to scrub floors, her hands calloused but steady. Despite her fatigue, she exuded quiet dignity and kindness. "Senor, can I help you?" she asked in accented English. "I'm looking into Sophie Miller's case," Ethan said gently. "Do you remember her?" Rosa's eyes widened with recognition. "See, of course. Sophie was good, very good, always smiling, even when tired. But after the jewels went missing, people whispered. Management wanted someone to blame. Sophie was easy. Did you ever see anything suspicious?" Rosa glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. "That young concierge Daniel, always hanging around VIP guests, always in places he didn't belong. The night of the theft, I saw him near the service elevator, close to the suite where the jewels were lost. He looked nervous, like he was hiding something. But when I told security, they shushed me, said not to stir trouble." Her words hardened Ethan's resolve. "Thank you, Rosa. You've helped more than you know." As he left the service corridor, his phone buzzed. A call from Maria Hernandez, the diner owner. "Officer Carter, just thought you should know. Your friend Sophie stopped by earlier. Picked up the leftovers I set aside for her and the girl. She looked tired, son. Real tired. Don't keep her waiting too long." Maria's motherly voice carried concern, the kind that came from someone who had lived too many winters seeing people slip through cracks. Ethan assured her he would check in soon. But first, he needed to track Daniel Marks. Back at the precinct, he combed through employment records. Daniel, early 20s, clean-cut with slick dark hair and a sharp smile, had worked briefly at the hotel before resigning suddenly. His file noted a disciplinary warning for inappropriate interactions with guests. No forwarding address. But there was a record of him working nights at a nearby upscale bar called the Velvet Room. That evening, Ethan pushed open the bar's door. Inside, the air was warm, filled with jazz music and the clink of glasses. The Velvet Room catered to wealthy patrons, its leather booths filled with men in tailored suits and women draped in furs. Behind the bar stood a young man exactly as the file described, Daniel Marks. He wore a crisp vest, sleeves rolled to reveal lean forearms, his hair perfectly combed, his smile quick but insincere. His eyes, however, darted constantly, calculating, as though every customer was an opportunity. Ethan slid onto a bar stool. "Whiskey. Neat." Daniel poured, then gave a sly grin. "Not every day a cop comes in here. What's the occasion?" Ethan met his gaze. "Looking into old business. Jewelry theft at the Grand Monarch. Name ring a bell?" For a moment Daniel's smirk wavered, then he laughed lightly, though it sounded forced. "That was ages ago. Why dig up ghosts?" "Because one woman's life was ruined for it," Ethan said evenly. "Sophie Miller." "Remember her?" Daniel shrugged, feigning indifference. "Housekeeper, right?" "Shame what happened." but the hotel had to protect itself. That's the game. Ethan leaned closer. Funny thing, though. Witnesses put you near the suite that night. Care to explain? Daniel's jaw tightened, his charming facade cracking. He set down the bottle harder than necessary. You cops always digging. You think you'll find some smoking gun? Good luck. That hotel buries everything Ethan didn't press further for now. He had enough. Suspicion confirmed, a lead to follow. He finished his drink, slid cash across the bar, and stood. I'll be back, Daniel. Count on it. As Ethan stepped back into the cold night, snow crunching underfoot, his mind burned with purpose. Sophie had been telling the truth all along, and he now had names, witnesses, and threads to pull. Somewhere in the shadows of the Grand Monarch and in Daniel Marks's slippery grin lay the truth that could clear her name. The winter storm began to ease as the week closed, the streets of Dallas glistening under layers of compacted ice, the gray sky finally parting to reveal slivers of pale sunlight. Ethan Carter had spent days pulling at threads gathering Rosa Alvarez's quiet testimony, Clara Whitmore's wary admissions, and the cracks in Daniel Marks's slick bravado. Now, with enough pieces of the puzzle aligned, he stood once again before the glass and marble grandeur of the Grand Monarch Hotel, but this time with a file tucked under his arm and determination burning in his chest. Inside the hotel, the management board had gathered reluctantly at his request. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Mr. Harold Green, the general manager. Green was a man in his late 50s with thinning blonde hair combed carefully across his scalp, a tall but stooping frame that gave the impression of a weary hawk. His face was sharp, his blue eyes cold but calculating. Years of protecting the hotel's reputation had hardened him into someone who valued image over truth. His pinstripe suit was immaculate, his tie a perfect Windsor knot, but his fingers tapped impatiently on the table. Beside him sat Elaine Porter, the hotel's head of human resources, a woman in her 40s with short-cropped black hair, wide glasses perched low on her nose, and a demeanor both practical and skeptical. Elaine's voice was calm, her manner precise, but she had a streak of fairness that sometimes clashed with Green's obsession with appearances. Ethan placed the file on the table and began. Sophie Miller was falsely accused of theft. The evidence never supported it. Witnesses confirm another staff member, Daniel Marks, was near the suite that night. He had a history of misconduct. Rosa Alvarez saw him by the service elevator. Clara Whitmore admits his departure was suspicious. Yet Sophie bore the weight of blame while he walked away. Green scoffed. Officer, the matter was settled. The guest was appeased. We can't reopen, Elaine cut in sharply. Harold, if the officer has evidence, we have a duty to review. Firing someone without proof undermines everything we claim to stand for. Ethan opened the file, sliding photos across the polished surface surveillance stills of Daniel near the restricted floor, copies of disciplinary warnings, statements from Rosa and Clara. This is enough to warrant a formal correction. Sophie Miller deserves her reputation back. The silence stretched. Green's jaw clenched, but Elaine's gaze softened as she sifted through the documents. It appears we owe Ms. Miller an apology, she said at last. And perhaps an offer to return. Green muttered, clearly displeased, but finally nodded. Fine. Draft the letter. Quietly. No publicity. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Not quietly. You owe her dignity, and she will get it. Later that evening, Ethan made his way to the small parking lot near the edge of the park, where Sophie and Lily had taken shelter in their battered sedan. The car's windows were frosted, and Max stood guard outside, his fur bristling against the cold, his amber eyes glowing like embers in the twilight. When he saw Ethan approach, Max gave a short bark, then wagged his tail once, a sign of reluctant acceptance. Inside the car, Sophie was hunched in the driver's seat, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face drawn but alert. Lily was curled beside her, clutching a crayon drawing of a house with smoke rising from its chimney, a little girl, a tall man, and a dog sketched in bright colors. She looked up as Ethan knocked gently on the glass. Sophie rolled the window down, her expression cautious. Officer Carter? Ethan held up the envelope in his gloved hand. It's over. They admitted they were wrong. The Grand Monarch wants you back. With a formal apology, for a moment Sophie just stared, lips parted in disbelief. Then her hand trembled as she took the letter, eyes scanning the words. Tears welled and slid down her cheeks. But this time they weren't born of despair. Lily gasped, hugging her mother tightly. "I told you, Mom. I told you they'd see you're good." Max barked once more, circling them as though sensing the shift in the air. The following afternoon, Ethan arranged something he had been planning since the first day he found Lily in the park. He chose the same spot under the oak tree, but this time the blanket was new, woven in warm colors. On it sat baskets of food sandwiches, apples, steaming thermoses of cocoa, all courtesy of Maria from the diner, who had insisted on contributing once she learned of Sophie's vindication. Maria herself came briefly to deliver the food, her salt and pepper hair tucked under a knitted cap, her smile radiant. She hugged Lily and whispered, "Told you good people don't stay down forever." The picnic unfolded in laughter and steam rising into the frosty air. Lily devoured an apple slice, cheeks flushed from the cold but glowing with joy. Sophie sat straighter, no longer weighed down by shame, her eyes alight with a fragile but growing pride. Ethan poured cocoa into cups, his hazel eyes warming as he watched the two. Max lay sprawled on the snow beside them, chewing happily on a piece of roasted chicken Maria had slipped into the basket just for him, his tail sweeping across the snow like a metronome of contentment. At one point, a young couple walking their child stopped nearby, drawn by the sound of laughter. They smiled at the scene, the officer, the mother, the child, and the dog, and for once Sophie did not shrink from the gaze of strangers. She met their eyes calmly, even smiling back, reclaiming the dignity she had lost. Lily then pulled out her crayon drawing and held it up proudly. "This is our new house," she said, pointing to the crooked little chimney and the smiling figures. "Mom will work again, and Max will guard the door, and Officer Carter will visit." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's a good plan, Lily." Sophie looked at him then, her dark eyes shimmering, and whispered, "You've given us back more than a job. You gave us hope." The sun dipped lower, painting the snow in hues of gold and rose. As the little family huddled together, steam from the cocoa mingling with their breath, Ethan felt the quiet certainty that his promise had been worth every step. He wasn't just a policeman today, he was a guardian of justice, of dignity, and of second chances. And under that oak tree, the winter picnic was no longer pretend. In the quiet of winter, what began as a little girl's pretend picnic with empty plates became something far greater. It became proof that when truth is defended and kindness is chosen, miracles can still happen. Sophie found her dignity again, Lily found hope, and even Max, the loyal shepherd, reminded us that love often arrives in the form of silent guardians. This story is not just about one family in Dallas. It is about the way God can work through strangers, turning despair into deliverance. Sometimes his miracles are not thunder and lightning, but simple acts of compassion. A scarf shared, a warm meal offered, a promise kept. In these everyday gestures, his presence shines. In our own lives, we may see others carrying invisible burdens. Perhaps it is a neighbor, a friend, or even someone we pass on the street. May we remember this story and choose to extend the same grace, trusting that when we do, we become instruments of His will. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Where have you seen small miracles in your own life? And if you believe that God still works wonders through love, I encourage you to type one simple word below: Amen. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope and faith, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that even in the coldest seasons, God's warmth is near. May the Lord bless you and keep you always.